Before the handcuffs, before the lawsuit, before any of it, Clarence was just trying to eat lunch. That's the part nobody talks about. Not the hearing, not the payout, not the press conference where the mayor stood at a podium and used words like systemic and accountability while flashbulbs went off in his face. Nobody talks about the fact that it started with a man sitting alone at a corner table in a hotel restaurant, waiting for someone to take his order. His name was Clarence Beaumont, 41 years old. He'd driven 3 hours from Raleigh to attend a conference at the Aldridge Grand in Charlotte, North Carolina, a place that advertised itself as the premier destination for business travelers in the Southeast. Marble floors. A restaurant called Ember and Stone that had a prix-fixe lunch menu and candles on every table, even at noon. The kind of place where the silverware felt heavier than it needed to be. Clarence had been to nicer. He'd eaten at nicer. But he wasn't thinking about any of that when he walked into Ember and Stone on the afternoon of a Tuesday in March and asked the host for a table for one. He was thinking about the keynote he'd just delivered. Whether it had landed, whether the thing he'd said about risk modeling in the second act had been too dense for a general audience. He was, in other words, thinking about work. The way people who care about what they do are always, somewhere in the back of their mind, still at work. The host, a young man named Tyler, according to the silver name tag on his lapel, had looked at Clarence for a beat too long before picking up a menu. Not a rude look exactly, more like a recalibration, a quiet adjustment of some internal setting. Clarence had seen that look before. He was shown to a table near the kitchen, not the worst table in the room, but close. 3 other tables in his section sat empty. 2 of them were closer to the window. He didn't say anything. He sat down, put his conference lanyard in his jacket pocket, and opened the menu. He waited 11 minutes before anyone came over. He knew it was 11 minutes because he'd checked his phone twice. Once when he sat down. Once when he started to wonder. He wasn't the type to stew. He believed in giving people the benefit of the doubt. Understaffed, maybe. Tuesday rush, maybe. He took a sip of water and gave it another few minutes. The server who eventually arrived was not the server who'd been working his section for the past 10 minutes. That server, a young woman who'd walked past his table 3 times with water pitchers and bread baskets for other guests, had apparently been reassigned or replaced. The man who came instead introduced himself as a supervisor. His name tag said Merit. He didn't have a notepad. He didn't have a smile exactly. He had the posture of someone who had decided something already and was now coming to deliver the verdict. "Sir," Merritt said, "do you have a room reservation with the hotel?" Clarence looked up from the menu. "I'm here for the conference. I'm a registered attendee." "Right. But Ember and Stone is a guest restaurant. It's primarily for hotel guests." "Primarily," Clarence repeated. "I'd be happy to point you toward the cafe on the 2nd floor. The menu is more casual, but the food is very good." Clarence set down the menu. He set it down gently, the way a man does when he's deciding what kind of response this moment deserves. "I've been sitting here for over 10 minutes. No one told me that when I was seated." Tyler didn't mention it. Something shifted in Merritt's face. Not embarrassment, not shame, something closer to mild inconvenience. "I apologize for the confusion. But if you're not a hotel guest, I'd like to speak with the manager." Merritt straightened. "I am the floor supervisor. I'd like to speak with the general manager." The pause that followed was long enough to be a statement. Merritt looked at Clarence, and Clarence looked at Merritt, and somewhere in that exchange was an entire history that neither of them had started, but both of them understood perfectly. "I'll see if he's available," Merritt said. He walked away. He did not hurry. Clarence looked around the dining room. At the other tables, guests were eating. Couples, mostly. A few solo diners with laptops. A group of 4 in suits near the window, white, early 50s, the kind of men who laugh in a way that fills a room. None of them were being asked about room reservations. He picked up his phone. He didn't call anyone. He just held it, the way people do when they need something to hold on to. 4 minutes later, not the general manager but a man named Gideon Price appeared. He was the assistant general manager, he explained, shaking Clarence's hand with the firmness of someone who'd been trained in de-escalation. He wore a dark blazer and a practiced expression, professional concern, evenly distributed, revealing nothing. Mr. Beaumont, Clarence Beaumont. Mr. Beaumont, I understand there's been some confusion about our dining policy. There's no confusion, Clarence said. I was seated. No policy was mentioned. I waited over 10 minutes. Then I was told I shouldn't be here because I'm not staying in the hotel. Gideon nodded slowly. I want to assure you that our policy applies to all walk-in guests equally. I don't believe that, Clarence said. I looked around this room. I've been looking around this room for the past 15 minutes. I'd like you to walk me through how that policy is being applied to the other tables currently seated. Gideon's expression shifted, still professional, still even. But there was something behind the eyes now, a recalculation. Sir, I don't think there's any need to, because if this policy exists, it wasn't posted at the entrance. Tyler didn't mention it, and the 4 men by the window have been here since before I arrived. Are they hotel guests? A pause. I'd have to check. I'd like you to check. Gideon did not check. What he did instead was lower his voice and lean slightly forward, the way people do when they want a conversation to become private. Mr. Beaumont, I think the most productive thing here would be for you to what? The word landed flat. There was no hostility in it. Just a refusal to be redirected. Gideon straightened. And it was in that moment, that small, involuntary straightening, that something changed. Because Gideon had expected, somewhere in the back of his calculation, that Clarence Beaumont would do what most people do in these situations. He'd expected him to weigh the discomfort against the inconvenience, decide the food wasn't worth it, and leave. He'd expected him to be manageable. What he had not expected was a man who was utterly, completely calm. Not the shaking calm of someone containing rage, not the tight-lipped calm of someone choosing their words carefully. Just calm. The kind of calm that comes from having done this before, from knowing exactly what it looks like, exactly what it sounds like, and exactly how it ends. Clarence reached into his jacket pocket. He did not reach for his phone. He did not reach for his wallet. He reached for a business card. He placed it on the table between them. Gideon looked at it. For the first time since he'd walked over, the professional expression cracked. Not completely, not dramatically. A small crack, the kind that starts at the corners. The card read, Clarence Beaumont Senior Legal Counsel, Civil Rights Division, United States Department of Justice. What Gideon Price did not know, what Merritt had not known, what Tyler at the front had not known, was that Clarence hadn't come to Charlotte for a generic business conference. He'd come to deliver the keynote address at the Southeast Regional Conference on Fair Housing and Employment Law. An event attended by 47 attorneys, 11 federal judges, and a deputy director from the Office of Civil Rights Enforcement. An event that had been covered that morning by the Charlotte Observer. Gideon's face had gone the color of the marble floor. He picked up the card. He read it again, as if the first reading might have been a mistake. It was not a mistake. I'm going to need you to put me on the phone with your general manager, Clarence said. Not an assistant. The general manager, and I'm going to need to see your dining policy in writing, the actual policy document, not an explanation of it. And I'm going to need the names of every staff member who interacted with me this afternoon. Gideon said nothing. When you're ready, Clarence said, and turned back to the menu. What happened next took about 40 minutes, which is not a long time when you're considering the full arc of consequences, but felt considerably longer if you were Gideon Price standing in the back of the restaurant on a phone call that had started with his general manager and escalated, within 12 minutes, to the hotel's corporate legal team. The general manager, a man named Patrick Souza, who ran the Aldridge Grand with the energy of someone perpetually 2 weeks from his performance review, arrived in the dining room at a near jog. He introduced himself to Clarence with the kind of handshake that communicates understanding a little too late. He offered a complimentary meal. He offered a complimentary room for the night. He used the words deeply regret 3 times in 4 sentences. Clarence accepted none of it. He ate his lunch, the roasted chicken, which arrived promptly and without further comment. And he asked for the check, and he paid it in full. And he left a 20% tip for the server who'd initially avoided his table, because he'd decided that whatever fear or instruction had governed that server's behavior was worth more grace than blame. Before he left, he stopped at the front desk and collected the contact information for the hotel's parent corporation and its regional director of operations. He filed a formal complaint with the hotel corporate office that evening, from his room at a different hotel across the street. He filed a second complaint with the North Carolina Human Relations Commission the following morning. He did not file a federal action. He would later say, in an interview, that he preferred to give institutions the opportunity to examine themselves before he examined them publicly, but he made clear that the option was available to him. The regional director of operations called him within 72 hours. Gideon Price resigned 3 weeks later. The official statement cited personal reasons. Merritt was transferred to a property in another state. Patrick Souza survived, technically, though his performance metrics for that quarter reflected a pattern of turnover and complaint volume that the corporate office found difficult to explain. The Aldridge Grand issued a formal public apology and announced a mandatory retraining program for all guest-facing staff. They also donated, after some negotiation, a sum of money to the Legal Aid Society of Charlotte. Clarence did not attend the press conference. He was, that day, on the other side of the country, in a conference room in Sacramento, representing a different client in a different case, because there was always another case. That was not a complaint, exactly. That was just the nature of the work. He talked about that afternoon in Charlotte only once publicly, in a commencement address at Howard University Law School 2 years later. He didn't tell it as a triumph. He was careful about that. He knew what it meant that his business card had changed the temperature in that room, in a way that his presence alone had not. He knew what it meant that the system had responded to his credentials and not to his humanity. He said that quietly from a podium to 300 graduating law students who had their whole careers ahead of them. "I want to be honest with you," he said. "What happened to me that afternoon happened because of what was printed on that card. It stopped because of what was printed on that card. And I've thought about that a lot. Because there are people who walk into that restaurant every day, who walk into rooms like that every day, who don't have a card, who don't have a title, who have nothing but the fact that they are a person, sitting at a table, waiting to order lunch. And they deserve the same response, not because of what they can do to you afterward, because they are a person. That's the whole thing. That's the entire argument. That's what we're here for." The room was quiet for a moment. Then someone started clapping. Then everyone did. Clarence looked out at those 300 faces, young, tired, hopeful, terrified in the good way. And he thought about a corner table near the kitchen and a business card, and a man whose expression had cracked at the corners. He thought about all the people who'd sat at that table before him and after him, and had no card to place on the linen. He thought, "This is why you keep going." And then he thanked them for their time, and stepped down from the podium and walked back out into the work.